So that is the Code on Wages Act, which was passed in August 2019, seeks to replace the four acts, that is Payment of Wages Act 1936, the Minimum Wage Act 1948, the Payment of Bonus Act 1965, Equal Remuneration Act 1976. Not only it replaces all these four acts, but also regulates wage and bonuses of all the workers employed in any trade, industry, business or manufacturer. So while the code is not a law, while the code is not a law, right? The Ministry of Labor and Employment on November 1st published the draft rules for implementing the provisions and sought comments from the stakeholders until December 1st. So following this, consultations were held, right? Following the consultations, the government will notify the rules that will create the mechanisms to fix a floor wage. So after consultations, a floor wage that would then undergird the minimum wages for different categories of unskilled, semi-skilled, and highly skilled that the states and central government would have to set and enforce. So after consultation by the union with all the stakeholders and after receiving the opinions, the center will notify a national level floor wage, right? So which will act as the minimum wage, right? So this floor wage will act as a minimum wage, right, which should be paid for different categories of workers, that is unskilled, semi-skilled, skilled and highly skilled, which both state and center should follow. Right, so both every state government as well as the union government is required to enforce such a law. Right, so this is what about the background of the issue. Right, so here you are required to remember these four acts which are right, which will be replaced, and you should know that while the code is not a law, so this code is not treated as a law. Right, so both center and so it is applicable to trade, industry, business or manufacturer units that either held by the state or by private institutions, right? So this code is applicable both for state units as well as private units, right? And both center and state should enforce this code, right? So why this code is significant? Why this code is significant? So, so another point is I forgot to mention, it is applicable to all the categories of workers: unskilled, semi-skilled, skilled, and highly skilled. Right? So this is what. So this is what about the categories of workers that are covered under this code. So minimum wages are accepted globally as a vital means to combat both poverty and equally crucially ensuring vibrancy of an economy. So combating poverty and ensuring the vibrancy of economy. So these minimum wages are accepted as a global means, right? And this has this was given much importance after the 2008 global financial crisis, right, which has eroded the purchasing power worldwide. So the International Labour Conference Global Jobs Pact of 2009, the ILO, right? So the International Labour Conference Global Jobs Pact of 2009 identified that the regular adjustment of wages in consultation with the social partners as a means of reducing inequality, increasing demand and contributing to the economic stability. So when minimum wages are ensured, when minimum wages are given, right, first of all the dent will be on poverty. So poverty can be controlled, right? At the same time, so providing of minimum incomes will increase the consumption demand. It will increase the demand and thereby contributing to the economic stability. So it is not just only in India, globally, right? Globally, this minimum wages act, minimum wages are seen as an important means, right? The code acknowledges that the aim in setting the floor wage is to ensure minimum living standards for the workers. All right. So the code acknowledges the aim in setting up the floor wage at which ensures minimum living standards, ensuring minimum living standards for workers, and draft rules incorporates criteria declared in the landmark judgment of the Supreme Court. Landmark judgment on the of the Supreme Court in 1992, as well as recommended by, right. So that is uh, based upon the Supreme Court judgment, based upon Supreme Court judgment and the 15th Indian Labour Conference, the 15th Indian Labour Conference, right, held that. So these minimum standards include net calorific needs for the working class family, right? Right, set at 2,700 calories per day per consumption unit. So their annual clothing requirements, right, houses rent expenses, right, and as well as expenses of children's education, medical needs, and recreation and other contingencies. So all these are taken into consideration. All these are taken into consideration, right? While fixing the minimum wages. So these are different criteria that has been adopted. That is 2,700 calories per day. Let similarly the house rent requirements, clothing requirements, house rent requirements, right? Expenses on food and clothing, as well as expenses on children's education, medical needs, recreation, and other contingencies, which are taken into consideration while fixing the minimum wages, right? So here the working class family, as defined in the Act, saying that, right, working class family defined as the earning worker, spouse, two children, or equivalent of three adult consumption units. Two children are the equivalent of three adult consumption units. So this is what the working class unit as defined in the Act. Right. So earlier, right, this minimum wages were fixed as per the norms recommended by 15th International Labour Conference and directions of Supreme Court, right, given in 1992, right. So it was in Reptakos and others versus workers union case, 1992. So here I want to write this case. Reptakos REPTAKOS, Reptakos and others. Reptakos and others versus workers union case. Workers union case. So it is in this case Supreme Court of India has given, right, directions for the government of India to take necessary steps, right, in fixing the minimum wages. Right? It suggested that the Minimum Wages Act should cover all the employees and existing restrictions for its applicability on the scheduled employees only be deleted. Right. So Supreme Court has suggested the union government. Supreme Court has directed the union government, right, to fix Minimum Wages Act covering all the employees. Right. So this is what about Reptacos versus Workers Union case 1992. So it is these two what you call things are the International Labour Conference meeting as well as the Supreme Court judgment, right, which acts as the backbone for this Minimum Wages Act, right? So the rules norms cover almost all the entire gamut of wage related norms, including the number of hours that would constitute a normal working day. So according to this act, the normal working day, right, is nothing but a day where there is 9 hours of work. Alright, so time interval for revision of dearness allowances, night shifts and overtime, and criteria for making deductions. So a separate chapter of draft rules, right, also deals with the payment of bonus, while other lays down the guidelines for the formation of central advisory boards as well as its functioning. So these rules on code of wages covers almost all the entire gamut of wage related norms. That is, these rules covers the entire norms, right, covering from the number of work, the number of hours of work, time interval for revision of dearness allowances, night shifts, and overtime, and criteria for making deductions, right? So this is what the ambit of the code on wages. So code on wages covers the entire gamut of labor laws, right? So right from constitution of number of working hours to the payment of bonus. So how this minimum wages will impact the economy? In what way it is beneficial to the economy? So we can definitely, in a single shot, we can say that this will increase consumption demand. Fixing minimum wages will increase consumption demand, right, whereby there will be an increased demand for goods and services, so spurring the economy, so leading for economic growth. So this is what we can say. So in a single shot, we can say that it will lead to increased consumption demand, increase in consumption demand, right? The consumption demand will rise, right? That is what. So a lot will depend on the final floor wage or wages, right, that the center will choose to set based on its consultation with the board as well as any state government it opts to consult with. So while a national minimum wage of 176 per day has been recommended in 2017, an expert committee, so this is what the minimum wage as recommended in 2017. Right, so while a national minimum wage of 176 has been recommended by an expert committee, right, an expert committee constituted by Labour Ministry, right, had in February this year recommended that the need-based national minimum wage for India. So the expert committee constituted by Ministry of Labour and Employment has recommended that a need-based national minimum wage for India ought to be fixed at 375 rupees per day, right? So additionally, the committee had mooted a payment of compensatory city allowance averaging up to 55 per day for urban workers. Compensatory city allowance, so CCA, right, up to 55 per day for urban workers, right? So earlier, the 7th Central Pay Commission had recommended setting up minimum pay for government employees at 1800 per month. 800 per month. So here, so if you take this minimum wage, so earlier the national minimum wage was fixed at 176. So I want one point to be very clear that these minimum wages set by center is only a it will only act as a suggestion, it will only act as an advice to the states, and states enjoy full independence in accepting this national minimum wage as set by union government. So before the implementation of this code on wages, right, so the the minimum wage as determined by union, it is only an indication. It will only act as an indicator for the states, and it is up to the states either to follow or not to follow, right? So now this system has been replaced by a minimum floor wages, right? A national level minimum floor wage, that is, so those state has every independence, right, in fixing their own minimum wages, but these minimum wages should not be less than the floor wage as set by union, right, as set by the union. So that is what the difference between the situation after enactment of this code on wages and situation before the enactment of code on wages. So before enactment of code on wages, there is nothing like called as a floor wage. There is nothing, right, there was no standard wage was determined, but now after enactment of this code on wages, states are required to follow this. States are required to use this minimum floor wage as the standard for determining the minimum wages. So now, according to this act, according to the expert committee, that we set the minimum wages as 375, right, as well as providing city compensatory allowance, shortly called as CCA, right, which is averaging up to 55 rupees per day for urban workers. Similarly, in 2015, the 7th Central Pay Commission has recommended setting up the minimum pay for government employees at 18,000 per month. Right? So the minimum wage is set at 18,000 per month, right, and adjust. So based upon this, the Delhi government set a minimum wage of 14,842 per month for unskilled workers after Supreme Court ruled in favor of the local governments, brushing aside the objections raised by different employee associations. So here, this is what about the floor minimum wages, the floor level minimum wages, right? So states are required to follow these minimum wages, right? So the finance ministry's economic survey had a separate chapter in this redesigning a minimum wage system for inclusive growth, stressed upon the importance of establishing an effective minimum wage system. So even the finance ministry, even the government of India, that has stressed the need for having an effective minimum wage system, right, such as statutory national minimum wage would have a multiplying impacts, including helping lift wage levels and reducing wage inequalities thus furthering the inclusive growth according to the survey. So that is this economic survey stresses, right, that minimum wage system is essential for inclusive growth. It is essential for inclusive growth. Establishing an effective minimum wage system, right, would have a multiplying effect, right, including reducing of wage inequalities. So according to International Labour Organization report, right, labor report presented in 2019, India has high amount of wage inequalities, right? So, and there is a gender discrimination in providing of wages, Say, I'll take one example, as reported in International Labour Organization's wages report. So, according to the report of ILO published in 2019, it says that in India there are differential wage payments. There are differential wage payments, right, which is a reason for high amount of inequalities, wage inequalities, right? Though the workers are placed in the same category, though the workers are grouped under same category, but still these workers have a differential pay, right? And in India, according to the ILO and according to Government of India, nearly there are 2,200 laws, 2,200 laws which governs payment of wages, right? So for each and every category, for each and every worker, for each and every worker groups, they have their own law. Workers in different categories, right? So just imagine the number of laws that we have, right? So, right? So in order to simplify all these laws, in order to bring a rationalization of these laws, this code on wages were brought out. Right? Another thing is, I was saying that there were wage inequalities. Wage inequalities, at the same time there are gender inequalities, right? In payment of wages, right? In the same in the same unorganized category, right? So let me give one example, right? A security guard working in an ATM, right? A security guard working in an ATM and a maid working in the household sector. A maid working in the household sector and a security guard working in the ATM. Both comes under the category of unorganized sector. Both comes under the category of unorganized sector, right? But if you take the wages paid to them, the wages paid to the security guard are higher when compared to the wages paid to the maid. Not only maid, even right, a male worker working in the household industries, they are paid less when compared to the male worker who are working in other unorganized sector. So though they come under the category of unorganized sector, there is a differences. There are differences in this wage payments. So this code on wages seeks to remove all these wage inequalities, and removal of wage inequalities is essential for achieving the goal of inclusive growth, right? So without having, right, without doing this, without removing this wage inequalities, without removing the wage inequalities, it is not possible to achieve what you call inclusive growth. So this minimum wages will right, will provide or will ensure a demographic dividend. So a robust wage expansion would ultimately essential to help. Right, it is essentially, right, leads to consumption-led economic growth. That is the point I was mentioning. It increases a consumption-led economic growth. Right. So this is what this survey highlights. So why wages are important? Why wages are important? So according to economic survey, providing minimum wages would be essential to help, right, increase consumption based economic growth, right? So this is what about the positives of the what you call code on wages act, right? Code on wages act. Similarly, right, what are the though there are there are advantages, there are certain concerns raised by different trade unions, right? Different trade unions have voiced their reservations. So normally, right, it is their duty to criticize the code, because so they are meant for criticizing this code. So the point of contention include 9-hour working day. So these trade unions are against the definition of working day. So they are against to this 9-hour working day definition, right? So they are against to this 9-hour working day. A lack of clarity in the rules on scope of upgradation. A lack of clarity in the scope of upgradation of worker skill category, right? And lack of representation for trade unions in the wage fixation committees. So trade unions are critical. Critical of their non-involvement in wage fixation committee, right? The ultimate success of the code will be determined by the extent to which this the ultimate success depends upon the extent to which the minimum wage set is both fair and actually implemented. Alright, so definitely yes. So it is upon the states, it is upon the executive bodies, with the entire, it is upon these executive bodies and the state governments, the entire success of code on wages depends. So today we see here in this context, I want to mention about one point, that is a point of distressed migration. The point of distressed migration. Alright, so in order to control this distressed migration, right, so this distressed migration can be controlled. Distressed migration can be controlled only when there is a common way among the states in having these wages. Right? Yes. So distressed migration. Distressed migration, nothing but migration of labor force from one state to other state, right, in search of higher wages. In search of higher wages. So whenever there is a differential wage system between different states, right, whenever there is a difference in this wage system, normally it is a tendency of this migration. There will be a migration of labor force. So there will be a migration of labor force from the state where there is low wages to a state where there is high wages. So to control this distressed migration, right, there should be a parity among all the states. Parity among all the states in having minimum wages. All the states should ensure minimum wages for their so that they can retain and they can protect the interest of the workers. Right. So this is what about what do you call the Code on Wages Act. And even if you recollect, so can anyone give the article which deals with this payment of minimum wages? So if you take Article 43 of the Constitution, Article 43 of the Constitution says that it is a duty of the state, it is a duty of the state to provide minimum living wages. Right? It is a duty of the state to provide minimum living wages, right, so that the workers have a minimum living standards. Right? So Article 43 mandates that it is a duty of the state to provide minimum wages, living wages to the workers. At the same time, right, participation of workers in the management of industries, Article 43A. Right? So both these articles are important for prelims. So 43 as well as Article 43A. Right? So duty of the state to provide living wages, right, for the workers. Right, and so workers in all the sectors, not just in industries, but even right by a law or by economic organizations in any or other ways, workers, agriculture or industrial, right, should be ensured a minimum living wages and the conditions of work, right, of having a decent standards of life and full enjoyment of leisure. Right. So Article 43 clearly states that all the workers, whether workers working in agriculture or workers working in industrial settings, should be ensured of living wages so that they can have a minimum living standards. Not only providing minimum wages but also ensuring enough leisure, so decent living standards, decent working conditions includes providing of enough leisure periods, right? So providing wages, providing decent conditions of work, which includes leisures and which ensures the life of an individual, which ensures a healthy life of the individuals. So this is what Article 43 says. So we just now came across the concerns of trade organizations, saying that trade organizations were denied or trade organizations were not allowed to be a part of this wage fixation, right? Wage fixation. So Article 43A states that Article 43A talks about uh, participation of workers, in the management of industries, right? So here it is from this article, it is from this right, non-justiciable right? Workers have every right to participate in the decisions and management of the industry, right? So these are the points which we should know, right? So just remember the Supreme Court judgment, Retakos versus Workers Union case, right? So which is a Supreme Court direction on providing of minimum wages, right? I hope you have understood the article. So if you have any doubts, you can ask me.